Hello! It's great to have you on this error and exception handling journey with us. In this demo, we'll learn how to handle exceptions by using the TryCatch, throw, and ReThrow activities. Why do we need to know how to handle exceptions? Well, because the end goal of creating automation projects is to move them into production. While our processes are running in production, it's reasonable to expect that the ideal conditions we've developed them in might change over time. Resources might become inaccessible, selectors might change, input data may be provided in unexpected formats, and so on. When the robot encounters a situation that it's not prepared to handle, it throws an exception. Exception handling means providing instructions to recognize these events and recover from them. Unhandled exceptions will terminate the execution. Alright, the project that we'll work with today reads input data from an Excel file, invokes a workflow that logs into the UI demo application, loops through the rows of the extracted data table, types in the values into the UI demo fields, and then clicks the Accept button. Let's have a look at the input Excel file. Since we're using a workbook read range activity, if the Excel file is open when the execution starts, the process throws an exception. We'll use this case to demonstrate handling exceptions with TryCatch. Let's run the project and see what happens. And here's the error. In the error message, we can see the name of the activity which throws the exception. Try to read input data. The error message. The process cannot access the file because it's being used by another process. And the exception type. System.io.io exception. Ready to find out how we can handle it using a TryCatch activity? Let's start. The easiest way to add a TryCatch is to right-click on an activity or sequence and select the surround with TryCatch action. We also have a keyboard shortcut that does just that, Ctrl+T. Another option is to add it from the Activities panel. The TryCatch activity catches one or more specified exception types in a sequence or activity and provides the options of performing recovery and continuing the execution, or of throwing the exception. The activity contains 3 blocks. The try block holds the activity or sequence that could throw an exception. The catches block lets us specify one or more exception types and provide specific steps for each catch. The finally block holds an activity that should be executed only if no error occurred or if the error was already caught. The most generic type of exception is system.exception. It includes all other exception types, thus the handling steps are applied to any thrown exception. Now you may be wondering, okay, what if we're monitoring for multiple exception types and one includes the other, say system.exception and system.argumentException? In this situation, if a system.argument exception is caught at runtime, then the case which is executed in the catches block is the most specific one, the one belonging to system.argumentException. For our example, since we know what kind of exception is thrown, we'll select system.io.io exception, the one we've seen thrown a bit earlier. Here, in the catches case for IO exception, we can add the activities we want the robot to perform if this type of exception is caught. Note that the exception object contains information about the exception that's caught. We can reference it in this block. Let's add a log message activity in the catches block and set its level to warn. The message we want to display is the exception error message, followed by the exception source. Both of these pieces of information are stored as properties of the exception object, exception.message at exception.source. Next, we'll add a recovery step. Let's include a kill process activity and add the extension of our process. Keep in mind that this activity will close all Excel files that are opened. And in the finally block, we'll add an if statement. Where the condition is, if our data table is nothing, then read the input data activity. Now let's copy the read input data activity from the try block and paste it in our if statement. Great! Let's run the project again with Excel open. Our project has handled the error successfully. The data is entered into the UI demo application, and information about the caught exception is logged into the output panel. Can you think of other situations in which TryCatch would have helped in capturing exceptions by type? Moving on, let's focus on the throw activity. This activity is used when we want to throw an exception, even if it's not generated by an activity. It's very useful to know that there are two key exception categories: application exceptions, like the ones we've seen so far, and business rule exceptions, ones that don't cause issues for the robot but can break a business rule for a process. For example, trying to withdraw more money from an ATM than the daily limit generates a business rule exception. In our example, let's say that we have a business rule which states that we must not add values greater than 100 in any field of the UI demo application. If there are values greater than 100 that we need to input, the process will throw a business rule exception and the exception will stop. Else, it will type the value in the UI demo app. So let's add an if activity, name it properly, and configure it. Let's add in the condition field convert.toInt32 row 1 to string greater than 100. In the then branch, we'll add the throw activity. For the exception property, we'll instantiate a new business rule exception object with the message, "The values are out of range, value greater than 100. Next, let's move the sequence that handles the data input in our UI demo app inside the else section. Awesome! Let's save and run the workflow to see what happens now. We can notice that the robot will only input the first row of values and then throw an error when reaching the second row. Note that the error message is like the one displayed for application exceptions. We're informed about the source. We can see the message we've provided inside the error property. And the exception type is uipath.care.businessRuleException. For a quick recap, how should we handle exceptions? Indeed, by using TryCatch activities inside the workflow for unexpected application exceptions, or by validating data using conditional blocks and throw activities for business exceptions. Moving on, we can use ReThrow activities only inside catch blocks and will throw again the exception that's been initially caught. This is very useful for scenarios where we want to catch the exception for logging purposes, but there's no possibility of recovery. In this case, we can simply log a message, rethrow the error, and catch this error in a parent workflow. And with this, we conclude our demo on TryCatch, throw, and rethrow activities. For a quick recap, we're using the TryCatch activity to catch runtime exceptions and to perform recovery steps. We're using the throw activity when we want to throw an exception, even if it's not generated by an activity. It's often used for defining business rule exceptions. We can use rethrow activities only inside catch blocks, and we'll throw again the exception that's been initially caught. Thank you for watching. Until next time, happy automation!